Interview time. Interview time.
Folks, welcome to otakusandgeeks.com. Justin here and back with more Tribeca coverage and more interviews here. And I have a really, really cool guest. Saw this animated show at the Tribeca Film Festival. We definitely got to talk about this. So please introduce yourself as an honor, sir. Thank you.
Hello, hello, hello. I am Z Cher-Aimé. I am the writer, director, creator, and lead voice actor behind Captain Zero Into the Abyss Part 2. And I'm super happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Justin. Appreciate
Thank
you.
Thank you. And the first question I have is definitely the concept of this. What inspired you to create a superhero like Xerxes who balances emotional vulnerability with strength?
So, my influences honestly come from a lot of places, and I think especially when you watch the short film, it's very evident. You can feel the traces of shows like Static Shock or even Batman the animated series or Spider-Man the animated series. These were all shows that I grew up watching that I think definitely had a very heavy influence on the kind of show that I wanted to create. Also, like stylistically, even when I think about 90s neo-noir animes or even just like popular animes in the 90s and early 2000s like Dragon Ball Z. But really, the desire to tell this story was birthed from wanting to tell my own original story. I myself am a suicide survivor. When I first initially conceptualized Captain Zero, the main concept behind it was honestly just me being able to get out this idea of trying to express to someone what it was like being diagnosed with major depressive disorder. When I was first diagnosed when I was 17, I didn't have anyone in my immediate circle that knew how to talk about mental health, especially at that point in time. So I really wanted to make something that I felt like I could give to someone if someone ever wanted to understand what it was like for someone that dealt with depression or dealt with like social anxiety or complex PTSD. And then eventually, what started out as a narrative to just help better myself ended up being something that I thought could be an entertaining way to bridge the gap between perception and reality when it comes to mental health.
And that's actually, I'm glad you brought that up because that was leading to my next question of how the decision to center therapy sessions as the narrative frame your storytelling for part two, because we open up the short with Xerxes in that actual session. And,
Yes.
just being a comic book head, anime head as well, that's what the
Mm.
website is based off of. It's rare to see a superhero in therapy
Yeah.
talking, especially seeing everything they go through. You would think,
Yeah. You would think, right?
yeah,
Honestly, it felt like one of those things that's like, again, it felt like a no-brainer. Like the minute that I did it, I was like, why had no one else ever thought of this before? Especially with how traumatic being a superhero can be, especially as you start to see in more and more, modern superhero narratives that give you a more realistic depiction of what it would be like if there were superpowered beings living and existing in our world, like Invincible and The Boys. I think again, something that's neglected is the mental toll. Like sometimes you'll see that depicted in some of these projects, but you quite never literally see someone actively trying to do something about it. And for me, that's the thing that I thought was important. Again, also, I wanted to, you know, I think media can be very powerful in the things that it represents. I think very oftentimes young Black boys, especially, don't get chances to be emotionally vulnerable. So I wanted to fixate the narrative of having the starting place being like he's already in the place to seek help. He's starting off on the wrong foot because he's lying to his therapist initially, but
yeah.
eventually throughout these sessions and what's further extended on the feature film, you start to see how all these threads come together and how he once he's actually able to tell the truth and Dr. Abby uncovers the truth, like he's able to really, really delve into why all of these things ail him the way that they do. So, yeah, centering therapy for me was so important, again, especially for that visual image to see a young Black boy in therapy actually trying to get to the source of his issues and not just, revel in them.
And I'm glad you also brought that part up too, because obviously as Black men, this is one of the things we're, and depending, upbringing where we're from, usually we're told to keep things inward.
Yeah.
It's usually, just stick it out, toughen
Hmm.
up, man up, as they always say.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
it's refreshing now that like we're at this point in time now where us, especially black men, are now really starting to like, hey man, I got trauma, or this is something I'm dealing with. I need
Yeah,
help. You're starting to see a lot more black men talking about therapy, talking
yeah,
about mental health, and to see a superhero go through that, and like we discussing, it's so rare because you would think just using superheroes like all the shit Batman sees in Gotham
yeah.
City. You would
Like he's
think,
not talking to somebody. That's never a thing, you know? And if you do, it's like such a one-off thing that's plot or
yeah.
story driven for specific narrative, but never the entire framework is like, no, this person is in therapy because they're dealing with a lot of stuff and they need to process it in a healthy way, you know?
Mhm.
So yeah, I think again, that's just one of the things about Captain Zero that makes it so unique. It feels like one of those something that feels familiar yet so new and refreshing.
And you also wear many hats in this production. Which one would you say was your biggest challenge?
The biggest challenge was actor for sure. The decision to be the voice actor of Xerxes was honestly one that was a decision that was based totally on finances. When we
Mm.
were, funding, the project, and we had to see where all of the various money would go, it was just like it doesn't really make sense to go out of our way and try to find this other person, especially if, who better to tell the story of the story that you're trying to tell than you from your own live life experience. So yeah, it was my agent, Pam Goldman. Shout out to her, who told me that she was like, I think you really, really have a voice. I really, really like because I submitted a proof of concept for her back when we were still working on part one, and that's what she heard, which was like, wow, I think this is something you should pursue, and moreover, I think you should fight for this. I think once we, start to elevate and get other people involved, there will be people that want you to cast someone else, but I think you should fight to do the voice of Xerxes. And funny enough, like in that trying to honor that performance, I also found, again, to your point, like the things that made it difficult, like when I did the recording session with Keith David, that was for me one of the
Yeah.
most daunting things as an actor. Like amazing, amazing that I could get such an amazing, prolific voice actor, human being like Keith David to do the voice of the Depression Demon. The recording session that we did was virtual. But I still, got to see him and be in his presence and talk and interact with him. And my goodness, like everything you think Keith David is, he's a million times cooler, a
Yeah.
million times more amazing. Like just having those few minutes with him, like I saw him quite literally turn on, like as he was looking at the lines and reading the page and was just like, okay, let's do a playthrough and just instantly just locked in. And he, oh my God, in all honesty, I think we did like 3 takes, but he nailed it in the first one. Like the other 3 were for safety, but he got it all exactly the way that I envisioned he would, all off of the first take. Like he's phenomenal. So being in his presence and having a read, because when we were initially doing those recordings, the way that I was setting it up with my actors is that I would give them each line that they had to deliver, and then I would deliver what my direction was for the line, what the inflection or the tone or the feeling that I wanted them to embody, and we would just go like that through the entire script because this was done partly when the strikes were happening,
Mhm.
because we were actually able to get an interim agreement from SAG because we were one of the few production companies that was able to agree to all the things that SAG was looking for in those demands during those strikes. So while we were that was my initial plan of what I went into of how I wanted to direct Keith. But again, Keith being like old school Hollywood, he was like, okay, I see in the scene there are lines of the Depression Demon like Xerxes. Okay, who's doing the voice of Xerxes? And I was like, oh, this is me. I'm doing. He's like, oh, awesome, you're here. Okay, so let's just read together. And I was like, oh, I had no intention of reading alongside Keith David that day, but it's like, but when Keith David calls you to the front,
You
there's
better
really
go.
no doubt. So I just went into it, and we're reading and we're going back and forth and I'm feeding off of him, and oh my gosh, it was amazing. So I definitely think actor, because that was this role, I feel like was the first time. I feel like with part one, I got to hide because I got to do all those recordings in the privacy of my own home. But with act two, with Zoli and with Angelica and with Koti and with Keith, I had to act alongside them. and there was nowhere I could hide. I had to be bare. And, definitely reading, books and, learning different acting methods and techniques definitely helped, but nothing was more daunting than that experience. But it was so rewarding at the same time. But that would definitely be the most challenging.
And as from a writing standpoint, because this is obviously an original IP, how
Mhm.
long did it take you to kind of come up with the concept of, because superhero, anything sci-fi superhero I can imagine is just a lot of imagination, because one, you're trying to be original as possible. You're
Mhm.
trying to do something different from the norm. So how did you come up with powers, setting, locations, and then obviously you came up with that central theme. But how did
Mhm.
you come up with which character has this power, which character has this, and the setting and everything else?
It was so interesting. When I initially conceptualized Captain Zero, the first idea of what it was supposed to be was just about my senior year in high school, being freshly diagnosed with major depressive disorder as a Black teenager. That was it. But later on through that night, I thought about, again, like other influence I had of what would make telling a kind of story like this more interesting. So I thought about, my love of superheroes, my love of animation. And honestly, from there, I want to say conceptualizing all the base concepts of what Captain Zero is, in all honesty, I probably made it in about like 48 hours. But what the world would become, like creating hyperhumans and the various different kind of tiers that they are, the origins of hyperhumans, and how we tie all of these things to important moments in Black history. Like something that we get to touch more on in the series is that so hyperhumans are basically this world's versions of like metahumans or like
Metahumans. Yep.
gangbangers, right? But the origin of hyperhumans focuses more on real Black history. So the story of Henrietta Lacks and the Hela Cell, the immortal cell line that she has, and how that was like taken from her without her knowledge and permission. There is a similar kind of storyline of what happens in Captain Zero that leads to the creation of all hyperhumans. So there are so many different parts of the story that I wanted to interweave with Black history. Again, doing the thing where it's like I want something to be informative, but also entertaining at the same time. So all of those story beds and concepts, and even the idea to specifically frame it through therapy, because mental health was always going to be at the center. One of the first actors I knew I wanted was Keith David, because the Depression Demon was one of the first characters I knew off the rip needed to be in this project. But it took a while for all the other characters to take shape and form. But Captain Zero was initially conceptualized on September 26, 2015, and this September 26th will make 10 years. So I've been
Wow.
working on this project for a decade, and I've only got to make the version part two, which is the closest version to my initial vision of what I always wanted Captain Zero to be until, this year. So yeah, it's been a long time coming.
And let's talk a little bit about some of your influences, because you did mention certain, you name drop certain shows. So I want to get into a little bit of your influences on the animation front. First,
Mm,
I definitely see My Neighbor Totoro, and I see Spirited Away.
yes.
So
Yes.
clearly
Yes.
we have some Studio Ghibli, and you mentioned some, I think, Batman TDS as well. So who were some of your
Yes.
influences growing up that made you wanted to do the animation front?
Oh my God. Like what? What's his name? Bruce Timm. Uh, of course, Akira Toriyama. Uh, Hayao Miyazaki. Uh, gosh, I always forget his name. The director who made Akira, who's still alive. I was so surprised to find out that out the other day. But the director who made Akira, like, oh my gosh, all of these projects were such huge influences. Man, I'm forgetting the name of the twins that made that.
Katsuhiro Otomo.
Yes, yes, Katsuhiro Otomo. Oh my gosh, like these I genuinely feel like, especially with animation, because I do genuinely believe animation is the best storytelling medium. I'm literally standing on the shoulders of giants, but these are the people that I look up to, that I aspire to, masterful visual storytellers.
And another question I have is definitely one thing I really wanted to talk about is the antagonist, but I don't want to give too much away.
Hmm. Hmm.
One thing I love about this antagonist is the inner, it's it's kind of a reflection of that inner turmoil of
Yes.
Xerxes. And I
Yes.
love that it's kind of like saying you are your own obstacle at this point, especially with what he's dealing with. You
Yes.
are the obstacle. And I love
Mhm.
how that just manifested with the whole central theme of mental health.
Yeah. Yeah. Like even the way that you see the depression demon begin to shape and take form over the acts. Like, there's three acts in this short film. In the very first act, that starts off as just a voice. In the second act, you're starting to see some of the tendrils and you're hearing the voice. In the beginning of the third act, you're seeing just the head as an amorphous figure. But then by the time you get to the end, the demon is like almost a huge, like the size of an entire skyscraper. He's so large. So you're seeing as the progression of Xerxes's, self-deprecating thoughts, of his lack of belief in himself, how all of these things are beginning to manifest his anxiety, his fear around others, his initial, desire for fame, but then when he gets it in a way that he's not at all expecting, how that starts to negatively impact him. Again, even talking about social media's aspect and how that plays a big role in what affects people's
Yes.
mental health these days. And how, again, the thing that he was searching for in the very beginning was fame. But when he got it, but not in the most desired way, it had super, super negative repercussions. Um, but yeah, yeah, yeah.
And my final question will be, if you can, what are your future plans for the series if you can
Oh,
reveal
most
anything?
definitely. Almost definitely. Well, I most definitely can for sure. We're working on a movie. We're in the very
Oh,
early stages of pre-production right now, but a feature-length film. And then right after that, the plan is a series. Right now we're in talks with a couple of people, so we're definitely trying to get a couple things off the ground. But yeah, that the very next thing that you can expect for Captain Zero is a full-length feature film, Captain Zero the movie.
and how can they follow you and how can they keep up with the project?
So you can follow us on all social media platforms at Captain Zero TAS. And if you go to cuttingedgeanimation.com, you can see all of our current projects, all of our future projects, and you also keep up to date with everything that we got going on. We're actually going on a multi-city in-person tour. We're actually going to be putting up the tour dates for that. So anybody that actually hasn't seen part two, now that we're in the film festival circuit, we've got the world premiere out of the way, we can host private screenings of the short film. So we're going to be hosting a couple of private screenings. Our first two confirmed shows are in DC and in Chicago, but we're going to be adding a lot more cities to the list. So definitely follow us at cuttingedgeanimation.com to keep up to date where we're going to be showcasing the short film. And then, yeah, be on the lookout for that movie.
All right, folks, you heard it. Go make sure you follow it. And thank you. It's been a pleasure. And folks, as always, if you like what we do here, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and visit otakusandgeeks.com. Later days.